There's only two things that actually matter if you want to become good at interviewing. The first of them is story bank. Okay, so people who interview well have some great stories to share, and this can be quite a lengthy process. And to put things into context, around 95% of candidates fail building a story bank that's good enough by their own standards. So long story short, preparing some stories for your upcoming job interview is of great value. Now, what are some common pitfalls that you must avoid while building your story bank? Well, let me define what is a great story bank. A great story bank has a good number of stories, oftentimes around 20 stories, which are revised at least 3 times. Okay? Revising them 3 times is key for any role, regardless of how senior of a role you're preparing for, regardless of how well you speak. Right? So now, knowing what a good story bank looks like, how much time you have to invest into the process, let's say to brainstorm for your top 20 stories, which you would revise 3 times. Not many people have this much time, so you must find what is the right number of stories which you can afford revising 3 times for your upcoming job interview. And keeping in mind, this is the first core element to a successful journey, right? The other thing that high-performing candidates always excel at going into job interviews would be a role play. So high-performing candidates always role play well. Okay, now how do you know if you can role play well? Well, the simplest way to test this would be to record yourself, to record your own answers. You can even build some questions that you might want to role play in the mirror, for instance, and then you would want to evaluate your performance, right? Being able to evaluate your performance and evaluating and scoring your answers will greatly improve your critical thinking skills, right? Now, of course, ideally, you'd want to do it in a more professional setting with an interview coach, because, then you probably get a little bit more of a critical type of feedback. But still, a role play will provide you with some invaluable feedback with respect to your delivery and will prevent many of the mistakes that candidates do while over-preparing their story bank, right? Now, if you consider role play and coaching, you should understand there's different types of coaching, right? So there's basic coaching where you would want to role play your answers in a bit to listen as a listening exercise, not just by your coach, but also for you primarily going into these job interviews. And there's also a more advanced type of coaching, level 2 coaching if you want, that would be with a more professional coach, so to speak, that would provide you with feedback on how you can significantly improve your interviewing skills based on what you're saying, maybe a bit of a challenge and probing questions, maybe a backbone test and these sort of things. But the important thing to keep in mind is that it's the blend of these two. It's the blend of having a story bank and a role play that makes the best candidates, right? Because what happens is that if you over-prepare your story bank, you might fall into some traps there. I don't know, some candidates prepare too many stories, or some candidates prepare too few stories, or some candidates prepare their stories using AI. So unless you role-play them to see how they actually sound, you will never get a precise picture of this. On the other hand, if you are someone who says, hey, you know what, I don't need a story bank, I know all my experiences, I don't need to spend all that time. What happens is that you'll go into a role play and probably your delivery will be good because you speak well. Maybe you're a speaker, who knows? But the problem is that going through a deep dive into a job interview will put you in great difficulty in remembering all the key details that will make or break your performance and ultimately their decision, right? So long story short, story bank and role play will be the 2 key components which you must focus on going into any job interview, and everything else is secondary, right? So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.